Burma, the Burmese military dictatorship, is a Buddhist dictatorship. It stays in power by building itself bigger and bigger pagodas in its own name and asking its luckless inhabitants and subjects to identify it, the anonymous military camarilla, with the precepts of Buddhism, which include the terrible, immoral doctrines of fatalism, surrender, reincarnation, and the idea that those who suffer in this life are being punished for the sins of a previous one. Okay, some brave Buddhists also oppose this dictatorship, but on no basis that one can understand except a rivalry within a certain cult. I've been to North Korea, the most perfected, the most perfected totalitarian system, probably in the history of the world. I've actually been to all the axis of evil countries, but North Korea, as you may know, is run currently by someone who's only known as Mr. Chairman, Kim Jong-il. He can't be called Mr. President because his father, Kim Il-sung, is still the president of North Korea. He's been dead for 10 years, which makes North Korea into what I call a necrocracy, or a thanatocracy, or a mausolocracy, but he's still the president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and the army, not of the state. You notice this, and he's considered to be a reincarnation of his father. You notice this leaves North Korea one short of a trinity. This is not an atheist state. It's the most worshipful and religious country I have ever seen. When I was young, I used to wonder. When they told me what hell was like, I could believe it. When they told me what heaven was like, eternal praise. You get to sing the praises of God forever. Every day, all the time, round the clock, forever. Not just for the rest of your life, forever. That's heaven. Now, sounds like hell to me, but I still couldn't actually imagine it. Now I've been to North Korea, I've seen it happen. That is your only right. Your only right as a North Korean is to sing the praises of the eternal, thankful, beautiful, brilliant leader for all time. Don't let Dinesh or anyone else fool you by saying that that is secularism. I've got a minute, right? Well, then let me squander it with just some vulgar knockabout. You might not have thought this election, this our great republic, the United States, was being fought to a very, very high standard from the start, and nor it was. But if you've noticed, every one of the cheapest and nastiest moments in this campaign, from both sides of those seeking not just the nomination but the presidency, has been inflicted upon us by a clergyman. All the low moments in this are the greatest secular constitutional republic, the only country on earth with a secular constitution, the only one that has a constitution that doesn't mention the word God, anyway, and by design, has been subjected to a consistent attempt to degrade the political process by people who prove that anything is permissible to any thug, any bore, any demagogue, any racist, any creep who can get the word reverend put in front of his name. Whether it's Jeremiah Wright or Hagee or, my favorite, the Reverend Rod Parsley. Sounds like a P.G. Wodehouse character on a bad day. One of McCain's advisors who says that the mission of the United States is to have a holy war with Islam. In other words, don't, as we have been up till now, don't confine your apprehension, ladies and gentlemen, of this threat to in partibus infidelium, to those countries far away on the horizon and far out of our immediate ken, where barbarism and superstition reigns. Bear in mind that this nonsense, this idiocy, this evil, this wickedness is coming soon to a place near you too, and get ready to resist it while you still can. Thank you.
Perhaps I'll begin by talking a little bit about the Archbishop Rowan Williams and Sharia. Somebody asked me the other day on a campus, what do you think should happen to him, the Archbishop? And I said, well, I think he should be horsewhipped. And the student said, but didn't Christ say you should turn the other cheek? And I said, yes, but the Archbishop Rowan Williams wants Sharia. Let's give it to him. So here, my point is this. If you actually look at what Rowan Williams was arguing, He was actually not saying that in the imitation of Christ, let's extend a forgiving hand and a welcoming hand to the Muslims. Rather, he was making an argument drawn from secular liberal multiculturalism. He was saying something not very different than you'd hear today on a university campus from a sociologist at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst who has never set foot in a synagogue or church, but who would argue something like this. Because the West no longer believes in Christianity, we now believe in nothing. In other words, you'll often hear people say, what we have in common is our diversity, which is another way of saying that as Americans we have nothing in common. What we have in common is what distinguishes us. And since that is the case, the only rational rule is to give everybody equal access to the public square. And that includes the secular guy, but it includes the believer. And if it includes both, surely it cannot exclude the Muslim. And so what I'm getting at here is it is precisely not a religious argument, but the collapse of the religious foundation of Western civilization that has opened the door to a certain kind of, you may say, namby-pamby version of tolerance. The Christians, by the way, have a version of tolerance. It's a little bit of a stricter version. In fact, think about the word tolerance. Tolerance contains the seeds of disagreement, if not contempt. If I say I tolerate you, it means you stink. You suck. I detest your principles. That's why I have to put up with you. If I agreed with your principles, there would never be a question of tolerance. So what we have now is a subtle shift from, you might say, Christian tolerance, which retains the idea of identity and truth, and secular liberal tolerance, which dispenses with it. Now let me talk a little bit about totalitarianism. I want to read you a line from the atheist Daniel Dennett in his book Breaking the Spell, is looking at this issue of religion and atheism. And he says this debate is getting a little bit too far out. Let's establish some clear rules. And the clear rule he establishes is the one drawn from the Bible, by their fruits ye shall know them. Now I'm going to quote Dennett. He says, it is true that religious fanatics are rarely, if ever, inspired or guided by the deepest and best tenets in those religions. And then he says this, so what? Al-Qaeda and Hamas terrorism is still Islam's responsibility, and abortion clinic bombing is still Christianity's responsibility. Here's what he's saying. The ordinary Muslim doesn't get to say, I'm a peace-loving guy because if really bad things are being done in the name of Islam, he or she bears some of the responsibility for that. And similarly, the ordinary peace-loving Christian has got to answer to some degree for the Inquisition and the Crusades and so on. Fair enough. If that's the standard, it's got to be applied equitably. What we have here is Christopher Hitchens essentially attempting a kind of, you may say, very stylish sleight of hand. He's basically saying, let's blame religion for the crimes of religion, and then let's take all the things done by atheist regimes in the name of atheism and also blame them on religion. Because after all, isn't it true that when you look at these atheist regimes, they kind of sort of resemble theocratic regimes? So what we're getting here ultimately, I think, is a dodge. If we're going to hold, if the ordinary Christian is responsible for what the Christians did, then the peace-loving atheist doesn't get to wriggle out from under the things that have been done in the name of creating the secular utopia. The 20th century was really an attempt to create secular utopia. It's failed miserably. So the one great experiment of secularism, of creating the religion-free society, has been terrible. Now you might say, well, what about the West? What about Europe? Remember that Europe and America, even in our secular moments, are still affirming principles that are part of our Judeo-Christian legacy. This is a point to which I will soon return. Thank you very much.